Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session of Thinking Space. Today we have two speakers. We have Javed and Chieh-ming presenting, and we'll start in a minute. But first, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I'm currently in the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we'll start now with Javed. Javed, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm MD Javed Azad, and I'm from Bangladesh. And here I'm doing the PhD under the supervision of Professor Bill Pritchard and Jeffrey Nelson. And the thing is, Bangladesh is one of the most climate change impacted countries in the world, where different climatic events like flood, drought, sea level rise, waterlogging is very common. The thing is, water-related disasters are increasing day by day. And it is not easy to control the magnitude of climate change, and it doesn't depend only a particular country, but needs a holistic approach from all over the nation, which is pretty difficult. Better option or the best option is to stand against this disaster, and which is the building adaptive capacity. And before that, we should also know what is actually defining or determining the adaptive capacity. That's why my thesis is all about what determines the adaptive capacity of flood-affected rural people in northern Bangladesh. And we will determine this adaptive capacity from the lens of sustainable livelihood analysis. Yes, I have already mentioned that this country is one of the most world climatic hotspots, which is ranked 5th regarding the natural disaster among the top 10 disaster-prone countries. And among the different climatic events, flood is the most common natural disaster because of the topographical situation, because this country actually lies in the confluence of 3 major river basin like Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Meghna. Another important thing is glaciers melting in the Himalayas, and the water that is flowing in the peak monsoon season to the Bay of Bengal that passes through the Bangladesh. And Bangladesh has only 8% of this total catchment. That's why flood is very common in this country. And most of the land area within the basins of floodplain. That's why the flood makes this country to very much vulnerable. The thing is, to determine the vulnerability and adaptive capacity, sustainable livelihood approach is really an attractive framework, because this approach actually determines how and why social actors make livelihood decisions, including responses to environmental change. Before that, Chambers at Conway, in their definition, they mentioned that livelihood comprises of capabilities and asset. That means he mentioned the importance of different livelihood capital in livelihood strategies. Therefore, and another definition, Bevington say that not only this livelihood capital, but also the modification of this substitution trade-offs and drawdowns on different capital, which is from here we can understand that interaction between the capital is very important. That's why my thesis is all about to determine the interaction between the different livelihood capitals and how this interaction, especially the combination modification, is determining the livelihood capital asset. Thank you. And my research question is, how do this capital interaction influence livelihood adaptive capacity in the context of flood in northern Bangladesh? And this is the framework of my study, and the framework shows the importance of capital interaction and how this capital interaction actually providing the livelihood outcomes and livelihood decision, which is actually influencing the adaptive capacity of the flood affected people. And the thing is, a lot of research that is they deal the capital interaction by the different statistical analysis like correlation, regression, chi-square, but those research were actually lacking finding the nuance of capital bundle, capital sequencing, substitution, and strategizing. And capital and qualitative approach has really a good merit to identify those situations. That's why we adopted qualitative methods. And Our location of the study was Shirazganj districts. It is one of the northern districts of Bangladesh. Bangladesh has 64 districts, and this district is very much vulnerable to the flood. And this district has also comprised of 9 upazilas. Upazilas are the sub-administrative unit of district. Out of these 9 upazilas, we selected 5 upazilas based on the flood severity and flood frequency. That's why 5 upazilas were selected randomly, and these 5 upazilas also consist of another lowest administrative unit is called union. We got 45 unions from these 5 upazilas. We selected 2 unions from each upazilas. That means we have 5 upazilas. We selected 2 unions from each upazilas. That means we have 10 unions. From these 10 unions, again, there's a lot of villages. And we selected 2 villages from these 10 unions by stratified random sampling technique. That means we have 20 villages. And we conducted 1 focus group discussion in each village. And I conducted focus group discussion between in February 2020 and March. And I came back to Bangladesh and took the last flight that entered into the Australia. Yeah. And the thing is, because the time is very limited, I tried to discuss my main findings of the study, and our findings shows that the financial capital, social capital, and human capital is very important in adaptive capacity development. Although natural and physical capital didn't play any role to adaptive capacity development, but it was contextual baseline from which flood adaptation was developed. And the first findings has already published last year in Ecological Economics, and it shows that. I also presented this paper in Thinking Space, so I'm not discussing this one broadly. But the thing is, they follow capital follows different 5 pathways because of its fungibility of nature. That means it can convert into other form of asset, and this is how different interaction happen between the financial capital and accessing other capital, and this way they build adaptive capacity. And the second one, when the focus group discussed, we asked the participant what capital actually important after the financial capital. They say, okay, when you have no access to financial capital, we had to depend on social capital. Or when we are not in a position to able to access to the financial capital, social capital is very important for us. And this chapter has already published in Climatrix Management in last month or this month, I forgot, whatever. This shows that different forms of capital are very important in building adaptive capacity, like bonding, bridging, linking. Another important capital arised in our research, which is hybrid social capital, which was first mentioned by the Rustan Chu in 2015 and 2021, but he didn't clearly mention how did it happen. What is actually the hybrid social capital play an important role, and how? He mentioned that hybrid social capital is the interaction between capital, but didn't mention how did it happen. And our focus group discussion and narrative shows actually the importance of this interaction between capital and the importance of bonding, bridging, linking, and hybrid social capital. Okay, there's a lot of classification and definition of bonding, bridging, and linking social capital, but we used based on the relationship and social structure of Bangladesh, we define bonding social capital as relationship between family members and relatives, bridging relationship with neighbors and friends, and linking social capital actually the relationship of community members with the institutional access like governmental organization, non-governmental organization, agricultural organization. This is how actually we define different forms of capital. And another form of capital is hybrid social capital. We already mentioned it is actually the interaction between bonding, bridging, and linking. It could happen any way, like bonding and bridging. It could either bridging or bonding. It could happen at any other. And the thing is, this kind of research hasn't been happened in Bangladesh. So it is very important because most of the research concentrate on role of bonding, bridging, and linking, but nobody actually discussed hybrid social capital is also important, and how actually this capital play an important role in different stages of flood management, like flood onset, flood survival, and flood recovery. our finding shows that bonding capital is play a very important role in flood onset, because when flood comes, most of the family members and community members become busy with their own work. They can't help, they can't go forward or come forward to help each other because they are very busy to managing their own asset. In this case, flood onset, family members comes forward. Like one of the examples is here. One participant actually have a small business back to the in Upazila town. So when flood comes, certainly his family members helps themselves. So that they can manage everything, they can protect their essential resources and essential assets. This is how family members are very important into the flood onset, especially when the flood comes very sudden and the flood water rises suddenly by breaking the river bank or something like that. And in surviving stage, bridging capital played important role, came forward rather than bonding and linking capital, because most of the people in the rural areas of Chieh-ming district is not very rich. They are poor farmer, they're small, marginal or medium farmer, but most of them is small to marginal farmer. So surviving is not easy because their only access to agriculture and other income sources become limited due to the flood. Therefore, they need other help. In that case, neighbors, friends become very prominent in surviving period. They get very small cooking stuffs to sustain in a day, even though they don't depend on the 3 meal in a day. They depend only 1 meal in a day. 1 meal during the survival period is enough for them, because most of the parents, even though they don't eat any meal in a day, so they offer their food to the children. And they also need some money to sustain their time. They neighbors, friends offer money to them, or they lend money from the friends. And this is how they surviving during the flood, by using the bridging social capital. Flood recovery, during the flood recovery, they need a lot of money. They need different housing stuff. Sometimes houses washed away, broken down. They need this stuff, material to rebuild their house. In that case, different relief material like metal tin sheet, this is very important to rebuild their house. In the study area, because flood is very common, most of the house is built from metal tin sheet, so that they can rebuild or reconstruct easily. Therefore, the help from this relief from the different government organization and NGOs is very helpful from them to rebuild their house. As well as there are a lot of NGOs working there, so their NGO beneficiaries get help from them, as well as they get some relief from them. This relief and help to the beneficiaries helps them to rebuild their houses, rebuild their farm, so that they can at least recover as early as possible. And the thing is, there's a lot of subsidy program from Department of Agricultural Extension in the form of seed and fertilizer. So the subsidy program from seed and fertilizer helps them to restart their farm activities as early as possible, so that they can catch the very recent cropping season or next cropping season, so that the loss become very minimized. Okay, linking social capital is very important, but the thing is, the population in our country is very huge, and the government agency's role is very limited. The people who got this access, linking social capital access, become benefited, but need more relief program from the government or non-government agencies. And finally, we saw that interaction between bonding, bridging, and linking capital is very important, which we termed as hybrid social capital. And how it works? That means when people is accessing linking social capital through the use of bridging social capital. That means people accessing linking social capital by using bridging capital. Like the example is shown here. One of the relief program was going in the near villages. So one participant received a call from his friend. His friend is bridging social capital. So he received a call from him, and his friend said, if you come to our village, a relief program is going on, you can get a relief. That's why after getting the phone call from his friend, he get back to the village and access to the linking social capital as a relief. That means the interaction is happening between bonding, bridging, and linking capital. And finally, another important thing is that someone's son's friend his grandfather is works in a Department of Agricultural Extension. That means someone's friend, his son's friend is a bridging capital, and participant's son is a bonding capital. And he's accessing the agricultural information and agricultural subsidies from the Department of Agricultural Extension. That means the interaction is happening, and this is very important in adaptive capacity development and access to different resources. That is important to build their adaptive capacity against the flood. And this is how bonding, bridging, and linking social capitals is important. But the thing is, not every capital plays a very important role in this sector. Like bonding social capitals play in flood onset, bridging was prominent in surviving during the flood, and linking was prominent during the flood recovery. And hybrid social capital somehow worked in every stages of flood management, but it was very important, which was not mentioned clearly in any research before we actually conducted this one. And the third one, when people have no access to financial capital, social capital, what is the important thing? The thing is the human capital. Human capital, but when he asked focus group participants to talk about the human capital, they start talking about the gender issue, especially the women. They said, look, we worked outside, but the women in the home, they manage everything. They not only manage everything, they work outside, they help us, but nobody talked about the women contribution. We should talk about the contribution. That's why we think, we thought, okay, the framework, there is gender framework, which is very important, where the contribution of women should be acknowledged. He said the contribution of the women should be acknowledged, and they are actually playing very important role in adaptive capacity. And our finding also shows that women actually play a very important role. Not only that, they use their inbuilt human capital to access other sorts of capital. They have the capability to access financial capital. They have the capability to access social capital, to utilize different resources needed for them to plan adaptive capacity development. Our finding shows that different forms of human capital that helps women to access different resources, like formal education is very important, because in Bangladesh, in national education curricula, disaster management has been incorporated so that the school-going children can learn what is the disaster, how they manage it. So the women who actually participated in the school education can help other community members about the water pollution. Like when flood comes, because most of the Bangladeshi, all the Bangladeshi people, not most of the rural Bangladeshi people use deep well as a drinking water resources. So when flood water comes, it becomes polluted until the flood water goes completely. Therefore, the women or girls who actually participated in this school, actually they encourage or motivate people not to drink the water that is polluted during the flood water. Otherwise, they will suffer different waterborne diseases. And in the study area, there's not too many like flood shelter, but the women, they don't want to go to the flood shelter because of the security or some other else. But the women who participated in the education, she actually encouraged other women to go for flood shelter. They encourage flood that this is really a good place. This is the only option they left, because they can't live in the house because flood house is already underwater. So if they go there, they can survive with their children, and this is not a problem. This security matter is not a problem. This is how she encourages other women to go to the flood center. And household management is skill. Women's household management is skills from their regular experience, from their regular learning. They actually follow different adaptive capacity of different flood management technique by food preservation, like how to protect their livestock by collecting food in advance, how to protect their animal to keep them onto the boat. This is how they manage different household resources by their own skills from that they learn from the experience. They also sell their labor in the farm, like they work in their own farm, they work outside. This is how they contributed to the family income. And in as well as women also take care of their family member who is disabled. So they are actually managing their houses and taking care of the disabled person as well. And another important thing, they also learn something that is learn something how to use different plant material as a medical treatment, because they don't have medical facilities. So women are very knowledgeable to use this plant material to protect from waterborne diseases or different diseases during the flood. Also, women use different social capital, like they use bonding capital, bridging capital, and linking capital. In bonding capital, they actually you call his parents to access some money or access some help during the flood. They have good contact with the neighboring, like they call a sister-in-law in Bangladesh. It's called bhabi. They can contact with them and can access different assets. Also, for women to it's very easy to access the linking social capital, especially getting the relief. Women, when there is women in front, the relief, getting relief becomes very easy rather than the men, because the people think the women are more vulnerable to the other than the men. And the financial capital also, women contributed to the family income by household, the homestead gardening, by poultry rearing. When there is some surplus, they sell to the other neighbors, they sell to the market, from where they actually contributing to the family income. And also they work as a safeguarding of household asset, like boat, like people use boat to transport during the flood. Also they use boat as income earning sources, but the engine that is used in boat actually always theft, because theft increased during the flood very heavily. So they actually safeguard, they guard their women actually guard this asset the whole night, because men cannot do this at night, because men have to do the work in the daytime. This is how actually they are protecting their financial asset as well. And our whole thesis shows that financial is the preeminent driver of household adaptive capacity, because of fungibility nature, because of the can convert into other form of capital. And when there is no financial capital, social capital is very important, like bonding, leasing, and linking. They play different role in different stages of flood management. And human capital, especially gender, women are very important in access, bonding, bridging, and linking capital. And in all these cases, interaction between capital happens, and different interaction we observe, like capital contributivity, capital substitutability, capital asset clustering, complementary substitution. All this interaction happen between this capital, which is very important in accessing other form of capital. Therefore, interaction is very important in defining the adaptive capacity. And that's all. Thank you. Sharing. Yeah. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, Javed. I think that was a really fascinating presentation. Let's have two questions. We'll keep them fairly quick, then go to Ming, and then following that, if we have time, we can do some follow-up. So do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks, Javed.
I was expecting.
Fantastic to see it all come together. You're obviously covering a lot of your entire thesis almost in the one presentation there. So congratulations on bringing it all together.
Yeah.
You obviously shown how the importance of the various, particularly I guess what came through to me was the importance of the various types of social capital in sort of encouraging and allowing adaptation and responsiveness to the floods. I guess I was wondering whether in any of your papers or in your thesis, you don't have to, of course, but whether you drew that out to sort of think about policy prescriptions, or how this sorts of knowledge might be used by different actors, whether you look into that at all at any stage.
Yes, that's important. We didn't discuss because of short period of time I can't actually accommodate up the thing. The thing is, our main objective was the interaction. The things, if you have one capital, what is interaction? If you have one capital, it can be able to access other form of capital. So policy making. You don't need to think all the capital or resources to need to provide to the participant or villagers. If you go for the subsidy, they can rejuvenate, they can restart the farming. From this funding, they can earn more money. That means there is interaction. If you go for subsidy, it's fine. You don't need to go for that. Even though if you go for any alternative income earning opportunities, they can actually go for savings, they can survive themselves. Another important thing,
when people have no financial capital, look, social capital important. So the government or policy making can work in there. Okay, if we encourage people to build more relationship structure between them, so that they can help themselves, because that like helping hand that is in Australia that is present, if there is any disaster, people comes to help like any helping agency. But in Bangladesh is quite different, because the transport facilities become very poor, and the most of the people and the disaster management system is not developed in our country. So therefore the government can take policy from this social capital. Okay, look, interaction between different capital is important. So if we think the social capital is important, how we actually develop more thing in social capital way. Another important thing, human capital. When people have no interaction with financial capital or social capital, human capital important. So people, government can take initiative by giving more training facilities, and what are the factors like education facilities more with, so that they can improve themselves and they can contribute to the adaptive capacity.
So one more question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob. Thanks, Javed, for the presentation. I'm just wondering, I think your presentation really highlighted the importance of social capital, right, in building adaptive capacity. I'm just wondering, have you found any kind of results or evidence of the other side of the coin, like how social capital can actually, in some way decrease adaptive capacity? And the reason I'm asking is, at least, from my fieldwork in the Philippines, I realized that for some groups who have, this very strong linking and bridging capital, actually tend to, so they get the relief better, quicker and faster, to the detriment of other groups who don't have those connections and networks. So I'm just wondering, to what extent have you found social capital to actually be, in a way, increasing vulnerability or increasing inequality within a certain community? Did that come out?
Actually, the thing is, you said, okay, not only social capital, our findings show that main is financial capital. Financial capital is the leading role, play leading role in adaptive capacity. But when they have no access to financial capital, social capital comes into front. Then they use social capital, social relationship to access different resources. The thing is, you have actually raised an important question, how this can contribute to the adaptive capacity development and how actually it works. It's true that most of the people need in flood recovery or flood survival, they need outsider help, especially the government agency. But the thing is, not a single government agency think about this. They are important, but the thing is, Bangladesh is a huge country. They have a huge population with limited access and limited disaster management technique. But from these findings, they can think, okay, social capital is really important. We can work on this and how we can allocate different resources, like not only financial capital, access to different resources. This is how actually government can work in this side.
Geosciences people. And it's always nice to see you guys there. And I think this is the first time I'm presenting my work with you guys from online. And anyway, my presentation title is Urbanizing Global Expertise, Bangkok's Worlding Aspirations and Knowledge Conflicts. I will explain this term, worlding, soon later. So there will be three parts of this presentation. The first one will be the issue background and my research questions. And the second part will be the conceptual framework and the research methodology for this study. The third part will have findings, analysis, and the implications from this case study. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you how the street trees look like in Bangkok, the capital city of Thailand. So from this picture, you can see there is serious tangling between the trees and the wires. And this kind of clashes between green infrastructure and gray infrastructures is just very common around Bangkok. So what's the problem then? So this picture shows a very good before and after contrast. On the left-hand side is the tree before pruning, and on the right-hand side in the yellow circle is a tree after pruning. So the frontline staff tend to do very aggressive pruning to make the trees shorter than the hanging wires. It's just the fastest way to keep, to minimize the clash between the trees and the wires. But there was this tree care training program in 2018, and some civil groups took the initiatives to create this training program where around 180 frontline staff of the Bangkok Authority learned a particular tree climbing technique. And the rationale for this, the goal of this training program was reducing the aggressive pruning by utilizing the tree climbing technique. Because, how to explain this? Because when you use the climbing rope to access the tree branches, you can get to the specific point to make a very careful pruning rather than very aggressive pruning to cut a lot to make the trees short. So this program was initiated by civil groups and supported by the Bangkok Authority and fully supported by local and foreign arborists, which means tree care experts. So when it took place, it looked like this. The people in the green uniforms were the Bangkok Authority's frontline staff. They were learning this tree climbing technique from the white shirt guys who were the freelancing tree climbers of the civil groups. So following this background, I have these research questions. Firstly, how and to what extent has this training program impacted the tree pruning practices in Bangkok? And secondly, what implications can the process and outcomes of this training program provide for future projects with regard to knowledge circulation? Okay, the second part will be the conceptual framework and the research methodology. Most people say research methodology is very boring, but I disagree. Actually, I think this is the best part of my field work. So for the conceptual framework, I'm engaging with this World in City scholarship. World in aspirations means the desires for global standards and the recognition. Urban planners and other actors in developing countries like Thailand want to make their cities famous at the global stage. And a very feasible way to achieve this goal is by adopting international best practices, successful policy models, and global expertise, something like that. And World a City can be done through diverse forms like smart city initiatives, water governance, slum upgrading, and also urban greening. So I am referring to this body of scholarship because the background of the tree care training program is just very similar with this World in Cities idea. And what is important here is that the World in aspirations for different urban futures create inter-urban knowledge circulation. And for the processes of knowledge circulation, I further looked into this policy mobility research, which examines how policy models and specialist knowledge circulate from one city to another and mutate along the traveling pathways. And an important critique of this scholarship is how policy elements are embodied in and tied to the policy actors have been understudied and need more attention. So I'm hoping to contribute to this research gap with this current study. And more recently, scholars are calling for more attention to urban expertise, which involves the partnerships, the politics, interactions, alliances, and the brokerage about urban expertise. And I found this one particularly important for this current study. Green infrastructure as the technical rational approach leaves little space for non-expert knowledge. So this is my research methodology, and for this, I follow the following strategy, which is informed by the policy mobility scholarship. So the essence of this methodology is researchers follow the people, the policies, and different meetings encounters to understand the process of the knowledge circulation. So I like to call my research methodology as talking, watching, and climbing. So firstly, I interviewed the officials of the Bangkok government and key members of the civil groups, and also the foreign and Thai tree experts who contributed to this training program. And then I learned the tree climbing technique from the civil group members who were the same people who delivered the training program to the frontline staff. And after all of this, I went to talk to the frontline staff, and I observed their works, and I even worked with a team. So now the part 3, I'm revealing the outcomes of this training program, but I can tell you very straightforward. The frontline staff have been sticking to their conventional way to conduct tree pruning, which is standing on the truck. So I put this picture here for you to visualize what it looked like. So I would say the learning was successful, but the application was limited. It was successful because literally all of my interviews say it was not difficult and we learned that. But they also point out that it's only useful for pruning trees in large open spaces, not for street trees, because of a lot of place-specific constraining factors. And the most important one is the relationships between tree size and the worker's safety. You know, when you climb a tree, you want to climb a big and established tree because you can fix your climbing rope to a sturdy branch. If you climb a young tree, the branch could break when you are climbing, and the result will be deadly. And other factors including the accessibility to specific trees or green spaces, and the space required for setting the climbing rope, and what is your purpose of pruning? You want beautiful landscape, or you want to reduce the tangling between trees and wires? So I guess these factors are easier to understand with pictures, so that I'm showing you a lot of pictures here. Okay, on the left-hand side was a tree pruned with a climbing rope. So this was a Muslim cemetery. And you can see there are a lot of graveyards on the ground that prevents the trucks from getting close to the tree. But it was easy for the tree workers to apply the tree climbing technique. And similar, you can find a tree worker using the climbing technique to prune a tree in the temple yard. Oh, he was very proud of this selfie. So he asked me to show his picture here when I share my work. And the important thing is he used this climbing technique because that tree was too large to access with trucks, and also because that temple is far from the main traffic, and there was ample space for him to set the climbing rope. But trucks remain the primary lifting tool for pruning street trees because they can be accessed easily with the trucks. But more than the tree size and accessibility, there are also a lot of temporal constraining factors, including the traffic peak hours, the time for the retreatment of pruned materials, and staff working hours, and also weather. Okay, the story is, here's the story. the staff work 8 hours a day from Monday to Saturday, but that doesn't mean they can do tree pruning for 8 hours. Actually, they only do tree pruning from 9 a.m. to around lunchtime. And after that, the truck will be fully loaded with the pruned materials and then go to the fertilizer factory, which is far away at the outskirts of Bangkok. And a round trip from central Bangkok to the outskirts, I mean the location of the fertilizer factory, will take 2 to 3 hours. And when the truck is away, the staff don't have trucks to access the street trees, but they also have a lot of non-pruning works to do. So this is the routine formulated by a lot of temporal factors. Another one is the weather. It's either very hot or raining in the afternoon in Bangkok. When it's very hot, it's dangerous for the staff because there was risk of heat stroke. And when it's raining, you just should stop all of the pruning work. So with these two pictures, I want to show you the huge difference between the learning site and the actual workplaces. So in the learning site, there was no wires, there was no traffic issue, but in the actual workplaces, you just cannot avoid the traffic. And an important concern for the staff is you have to minimize the impact of pruning on traffic because the traffic congestion is notorious in Bangkok. And if you prune the trees for a long time, your boss will get people's call to complain about your planning work, worsening the traffic. And that is a no-no, we don't want that. And from these two pictures, I just want to show you how a fully loaded truck looks like. And the other picture shows the inside of the fertilizer factory. So I conducted my field work after this training program. And what I saw was not promising because I found aggressive pruning from time to time across Bangkok. And in 2020, there was a fierce debate between the civil groups and the district office because the tree maintenance staff of the district office, after learning the tree climbing technique, still conducted very aggressive pruning on a famous road in central Bangkok. And there was some follow-up about this fierce debate, but that is not the point today. The point for this presentation is that this news supports my evaluation of the limited outcomes of the training program. So when I further looked into the reasons for the limited outcomes, I found the goals between the civil groups and the frontline staff were not aligned. The civil groups put emphasis on tree health and aesthetics, but the frontline staff just wanted to remove the tree wire tangling as quickly as they can, which is important to reduce the risk of tree collapse. So like I just explained, there are a lot of constraints for applying this tree climbing technique in Bangkok, but the civil group's wording aspirations made them overlook this critical constraint. Actually, the civil group's members told me many times, our workers don't have enough knowledge and our government just very stupid. They don't understand how advanced countries do this kind of job. That's why we have to intervene and introduce this technique by ourselves. So they only collaborate with the experts in devising the training program. None of the Bangkok government's frontline staff or officials were involved in the devising and delivering of this training program. That is why I said here, frontline staff voices were marginalized in the training program. So here are the implications from this study. Firstly, urban green spaces are highly diverse, and tree maintenance practices actually involve a lot of interrelated temporal, place, and resource factors. They are just not singular, I want to put emphasis on the plurality here. And secondly, working aspirations for the world-class, the global, could overlook the critical local context. And this is resonating with the critique of the GI approach. So based on these implications, I argue for a more inclusive approach for future urban tree interventions, or actually any initiatives where you need to mesh global expertise with local experience as well. So my presentation finishes here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ming. That was really interesting. We have time for a few questions. I'd just like to make an observation that some of your photographs were pretty striking, just how many trees there are in Bangkok. I lived in Bangkok for 5 years and I thought such an incredibly dense population, there wouldn't be, I didn't expect to see trees. And I'd look out of my apartment window on the 29th floor and there were trees everywhere, you know, mixed with houses and so forth. So I think it's sort of, your presentation really highlights just, you know, what a city which is in some ways not associated with greenery can actually be quite green. So thank you for that alone. It's good.
Thanks, Mark.
Questions? Anyone who's been to Bangkok and doesn't agree with me?
I was just thinking, one of my students was having a lecture at me in class just before about how there's no nature in Hong Kong. Like, you're stuck on your ideology of nature is constraining you from seeing the nature in Hong Kong. Anyway, this was just happening a few hours ago. Ming, I'm just wondering whether you could reflect a little bit more about inclusiveness in terms of how you design these urban policies, because it's all very well to talk about inclusiveness, but in reality, these kinds of programs are structured by uneven relations of power and different kinds of knowledge and so on. And so how, like practically speaking, you know, how do you actually include these different kinds of knowledges when building planning programs like this?
Oh yeah, thanks, Sophie. So this is a very good question, because actually this study challenges the normal, the general imagination about the relations between knowledge and power. So if you read the journal papers, you normally find people say, we want to create positive knowledge co-production. We need to give more chances for citizens to articulate their ideas and viewpoints. But in this case, actually, the citizens are in the same side with the experts, and the frontline staff have been regarded as the unprofessional professionals. So this is not like citizens are stupid and professionals are professional. It became citizens, they were civic experts and professionals were unprofessional professionals. So, and this, I think this prompts us to look more critically about inclusiveness. So in this case, citizens are included. Actually, they initiate this training program, but the practitioners were marginalized. So it could be other, I think it could be the case for other wording projects when you think not just the local politics, but the translocal interactions between the local and the global and different types of knowledge. Yeah.
Thanks, Ming. That's a great answer.
Any other questions, Neil?
Hi, Ming, thanks for that. I didn't know what your PhD was about, so that was really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about the worlding dimension, the kind of translocal, transnational knowledge flows involved here? I may have missed that, but you set it up in terms of worlding cities and policy transfer. So tell me a bit more about those translocal geographies of the knowledge that's flowing and being transferred.
Is that Neil?
Yes, okay. Yes, hello. Yeah.
Oh, hi, Neil. And so actually wording has two meanings in urban studies. And I was just mentioning wording for the second meaning. But actually the first meaning is equally important. And I would like to thank Sophie for prompting me to understand this. So thanks, Neil, for this question. I really want to highlight what wording means for urban studies, not just a city. So for urban studies, wording means we need to pay attention to the urban experiences from Global South, because urban studies is highly formulated and theorized from urban experiences from Global North cities, like New York, Tokyo, or London, the big cities, global city from the Global North. But the wording idea actually from the Southern urbanism prompts us to think more and to be more inclusive of the urban experiences from Global South. And another contribution of my thesis is I'm offering the first-hand experiences from Bangkok, a southern city, to the theorization of urban studies. And for your question, Neil, about wording. So when you imagine and want different, better urban futures like somewhere else, you want to create these connections, inter-urban connections, so that you can introduce different knowledges and policy models and best practices. You want to learn, you want to emulate the other cities. You want to get the good things here to transform your cities. That's why it's very close to the policy mobility research. And actually also there's a long tradition of study in the planning field. So they are all very highly overlapped. So I don't know if I answered your question.
What worlding did they do in this case? Like what was the worlding component of your research?
Oh yeah, because
I think that was just in a different chapter that you're not talking about here.
All right. So so I'm using this idea wording because this kind of technique, this arboriculture expertise is widely applied in Western cities, like in American cities, in European cities, and also in Singapore. That's why the Thai actors, they got the collaborations from the Singapore-based arborist, actually Aussie arborists working in Singapore and around the world, because they believe, if you can use this kind of arboriculture expertise in American cities, in European cities, in Singapore, which is a globally famous green city, then of course we can apply this to Bangkok. Why not? Trees are trees. Why cannot we apply this in Bangkok? This is their imagination about a different future, and they want to introduce this to Bangkok.
Is that the question?
Yeah. Well, both aspects of it, yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question if anyone's got anything. No? Okay.
There's a question.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's for Javed. Chat.
Oh, sorry, the chat's not showing here.
You see it?
Oh, from Wayu. Yeah, actually there is, I think we'll thank Ming. That was great. There is a question on the chat for Javed, so do you want to have a look at it?
Yeah.
It's from Wayu. It's how equal or unequal is the post-flood aid across the rural areas in your research context? I mean, NGO or state aid sometimes cannot be accessed by everyone. They could depend on its citizenship, land status, connection to political patronage, etc., which often leaves people on their own to rebuild.
Yeah, I have already mentioned this one, that the relief program, especially from the government and non-government, is not actually reached by all over the population of the rural villages because of the low funding in disaster management in Bangladesh. So there's not too much funding, although disaster is a huge problem, especially with the flood, cyclone, drought. But government has no policy to increase the funding here. That's why. But if you think that NGO play a very important role rather than the government agencies, and the political biasness is important. Another very burden to reach the flood relief program to the ultimate vulnerable people, because everything is politically biased. And another important thing is impurities, and impurities is another important between the relief program. That's why it doesn't reach all over the population, all over the villagers. But the thing who get relief program, they actually get benefited, and it is they think that it is really important in flood recovery and flood survival. But the reality is it is not reached by the all villagers. This is the real thing. That's all.
Okay, I think that's all. Thanks very much, everybody, and thank you for Javed and Ming. I think good presentations.